PFAS, short for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, are chemicals that are everywhere in our lives. These chemicals pose numerous health risks to communities around the world. An issue with PFAS, however, is that many people are unaware of their existence. With that said, I spoke with two PFAS experts working at CDM Smith to gain a better understanding of these chemicals and things people should be aware of as we learn more about them. So starting off, well, for people who don't know, who are you? What is it that you do at CDM Smith?
Sure, yeah. My name is Heather Lanza. I'm an environmental risk assessor with an emphasis on PFAS. And my role basically is to take the data that's generated during a site investigation, right, where we've measured concentrations of contaminants in various environmental media, groundwater, surface water, soils, and I assess the potential for that contamination to result in an adverse health effect to humans or the environment.
So I am Melissa Harclerode. I do go by Mel, and I'm CDM Smith's sustainability discipline leader. I help support public outreach and stakeholder engagement, and one of those focus areas is PFAS risk communication.
A lot of people, when they see the word, they just have no idea what it is. So what exactly is PFAS?
Sure, yep. So PFAS, or per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, are a large class of chemicals that are either partially or fully fluorinated. And the carbon-fluorine bond is the strongest in chemistry, making these compounds very resistant to degradation in the environment. And the persistence of these chemicals means that they can be found all over the globe and can be taken up into biological systems. And PFAS, certain PFAS, have been detected in the blood of people around the world.
Where exactly are these PFAS chemicals found?
Yeah, absolutely. So PFAS are man-made chemicals. They're not found in nature. However, again, because of the strength of the carbon-fluorine bonds, they're very resistant to that degradation. So once they enter the environment, they're going to move. They're going to be found in soils, in waters, all over the world, because they're not going to break down once they get into the environment.
Anything that is labeled as stain resistant, water repellent, non-stick, those have historically been made with PFAS as part of the manufacturing process.
They are used in other consumer and industrial products, some of which may still be in use today, things like aqueous film forming foam that are used in firefighting applications, certain cosmetics, food packaging lining materials, among others. And again, as I mentioned, the kind of uniqueness of these chemicals means that they are able to migrate, around the world, and so have accumulated in food items as well. Like fish are able to take up PFAS, so we might be exposed through the diet. And in fact, the diet is considered to be the primary source of exposure to PFAS for most people. However, this is going to vary by community, right? So in some communities where drinking water may be impacted, that community might have greater exposures than a community where the drinking water is not impacted, as well as individuals working in occupations where PFAS products may be used, for example, firefighters, or in certain manufacturing facilities. These individuals may have higher PFAS exposures than the general population.
PFAS can pose a risk to human health dependent upon how you're being exposed, at what concentration, and over what period of time. That is going to determine your level of risk to being exposed to PFAS compounds.
Unfortunately, there's still quite a bit of uncertainty about the toxicity, certainly of PFAS as a broad class, but we do have more information available for specific PFAS compounds, including perfluorooctane sulfonate, or PFOS, and perfluorooctanoic acid, or PFOA. The Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, or the ATSDR, they've reported associations between high levels of certain PFAS and health outcomes, including increased cholesterol levels, decreased vaccine response in children, and increased risk of kidney or testicular cancers, among others. And currently, the EPA considers decreased vaccine response as the most sensitive endpoint of PFAS and PFOA exposure, meaning that decreased vaccine response may be observed at lower concentrations than would elicit that increased cholesterol level, for example.
Federal US EPA human health advisory level is 70 parts per trillion for PFOA and PFOS combined. With that said, parts per trillion is a very abstract unit of measure. We don't really use it in our everyday lives. We don't cook and put a cake together based on like parts per trillion. So parts per trillion is pretty small. It's 1 drop of water in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. So if you think about Michael Phelps and him swimming during the Olympics, 1 drop of water within that pool is equivalent to 70 parts per trillion.
Quick correction that I'd like to add here. So, during the editing of this video on June 15th, 2022, the EPA actually revised their health advisory level for PFAS based on new toxicological data. So the new levels are 0.004 parts per trillion for PFOA and 0.02 parts per trillion for PFAS. This is thousands of times lower than the previous standard, so low that even current analytical methods can't measure PFAS down to that scale. Essentially, if PFAS can be detected in the water, it is above the health advisory level. So what this means is that the EPA is declaring that any level of PFAS detected in the water can pose a health risk. Because of this recent development, it does change how we discuss PFAS going forward. However, the points discussed in this video already remain relatively the same.
And one other thing I'd like to note is that the EPA and other agencies, when they're deriving their safe drinking water levels in particular, they build in what we call safety factors. And these are basically buffers to protect the most sensitive subpopulations, such as infants or pregnant mothers. And so this means that if your drinking water has concentrations of PFAS above, a safe drinking water level, this does not mean that an adverse effect will occur by default, right? It just means that we need to look more closely at this result, look at other sources of exposure, and things of that nature.
If you're getting results sent in the mail that shows the concentrations are like 100 times in orders of magnitude above these safe levels, that's when I would feel a concern as a member of the general public.
So since there are these health associations with PFAS and it's essentially getting everywhere in our environment, how exactly should people protect themselves from this chemical?
If you are a sensitive population, like have a compromised immune system, have an infant or pregnant or an elderly, you definitely want to consult your medical professional. If you've been informed by your water utility or a local health agency that PFAS are in drinking water above a health safety level, consider alternate water source until that treatment has been installed.
So we do know that PFAS are everywhere, but we can take meaningful steps to reduce our exposure. We can do this by considering the products that we purchase, understanding, if PFAS exposure is occurring through the drinking water by contacting your local water authority or your state health department. The EPA has compiled resources with information about how to reduce your exposure. This might include considering point of use filters in your home or identifying manufacturers committed to reducing the use of PFAS in their products.
One thing that's important to keep in mind when you're looking at alternative water sources is that bottled water is not regulated by the Safe Drinking Water Act. It's actually regulated under the Food Administration. Bottled water typically does not have PFAS tested as part of the process as your local drinking water utility would have to adhere to. Just because water's in a bottle doesn't mean it's necessarily safer than what's coming out of your tap. There has not been any recommendations by the CDC or health departments to start removing all of these products from our household. That would be a financial burden for a lot of us to be able to do that, because it is in a lot of the products that we use, because we like those things. We like things that are water resistant. We like things that are stain repellent, and we've been buying them for like 20 years. What I have done is slowly replaced things within my household that may have had these type of non-stick or stain repellent features that I don't necessarily need. But if what you have is what you've had for a while and it's intact, it's very unlikely that you're getting exposure at levels that are a concern.
And one other thing that you can do is to contact your local and your state representatives. Currently, there's a number of bills progressing through Congress looking at regulating, monitoring, or removing PFAS. And so contacting your representatives and telling them that this is an important issue to you is one way we can help phase out the use of PFAS in products.